Hey guys, welcome to this video about Substance Painter. In this video we're gonna take an in-depth look at everything in Substance Painter I use to texture. I'm gonna explain all about smart materials, normal materials, masking, filters and a lot more. And to do this we're gonna make some textures for this wooden barrel. I'm gonna explain at every step what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So I hope you enjoy. So we're gonna start off by setting up a project. Go to File, New. Then here we can select our assets. First let's go with the mesh. So I'm just gonna navigate to my mesh, click it. Then let's put the document resolution at 4K. Here you can choose your template. If you're gonna render it in Unreal Engine, I highly recommend that you put on Unreal Engine, obviously. But if you want to do something in Marmoset, you can put it on PBR or whatever. Then here we can add our textures. This will be the bakes that we did. So I'm gonna navigate to them. Let's just add them all. And if you don't have UVs, you can do an auto unwrap. But most of the times you have UVs already. Now we just hit OK. And here we have a model. Now we can go to texture settings. Now we can select our bakes here. So normal map, world space, our ID map, ambient occlusion, curvature, and the position map. And lastly, the thickness. I'm gonna explain a bit later what all these maps do. But for now, we have our model set up and we can start to texture. I do not like the default UI that Substance Painter nowadays comes with, so I'm gonna change it up a bit. I'm gonna drag this one down. Let's drag this one up. Drag this one up. And the properties paint, we're gonna drag it to the left. Drag this one more time to the left. Now it's a bit more organized in my opinion. We can also hit this little icon and we'll get like a tab where we can navigate between all the different stuff in Painter. So if we just hit the producerals, we'll have all our producerals here. Materials and whatever. So one of the most important things in Substance Painter obviously is the materials. So let's talk a bit about it. As you can see, we have a whole bunch of materials that come with Substance Painter. And let's drag one in the layer stack. So as you can see, this is a fabric knitted sweater. We just get one layer in the layer stack. I don't work a lot with materials as I don't really like to. Another thing that we can work with is smart materials. This is a lot better. So let's go to wood. Let's pick a wood. Let's go with this one. And you can see that we now have another material that's wood. But you can see instead of one layer, we have a layer group. Once we open it, we can see every layer that makes this material up. So if we just disable everything, you can see that this is a material like this one, and this will be our base. And then it's just working with layers to break that material up and to make it more realistic. So it's a lot better to work with smart materials, as they will have just more to edit in Substance Painter. Personally, I also don't really like to work with smart materials that Substance Painter gives, as it's just a really limited way of working. The best workflow in my opinion is to go up here and we create a fill layer. But this is just a layer with some basic values. And we're gonna make our own smart material. So instead of using this wood, let's make our own wood. So we can pick a color. Let's pick a brown. Put the roughness down. Now metallic. Let's make it a little bit lighter. Let's disable this one. Now we call this base. Then we can group it, hitting Ctrl G. And we can call this wood material. The next thing that I want to do is add some variation, some color variation. If we hit the C key, you can go to the base color, or whatever channel you want to see. And you can see that we have a lot of variation in the colors. Like here it's light, here it's more dark and saturated. So let's do that with our own material. To do this, I'm just gonna go to filters. So let's see, filters. You can also go here and hit filters. And we're gonna use the hue saturation filter. It's gonna work the exact same like Photoshop. This will allow us to change the color. So let's drag it into a layer stack. And a layer stack is just, here you have your group, and here's your layer stack of that group. So let's hit on the filter. And here you have the channels. Whichever channel you pick, the hue saturation filter will be applied to. So if we go to lightness, and we turn this down, the color channel will get darkened. And any other channel, it won't. Unless we hit the channel as well. But for now we're just gonna keep it at the color. Let's call this darken. Let's group it. Now in the base color, this is where the settings for each channel are. So let's go to base color. You want to set this on pass through. And now you can see the filter will be applied to our base. Anything that's under our filter layer, any layer, the filter will be applied to. But of course now it just makes everything darken, and we do not want that. So we can add a mask. Let's go to add black mask. Then we can add an effect. We're gonna add a fill effect. If we alt click on the mask, you will see the mask. It's just a preview. So let's go to a fill. Now we can go to producer rules. We can choose a mask. So let's go with clouds 2. Just hit it and drag it. Now you can see that we have a mask. Like Photoshop, the white will be shown and the black won't be shown. Let's go to UV projection and put it to triplanar projection. This will just make sure that any seams are hidden. If we put on UV projection, now you can see we have a really bad seam. And once we go to triplanar, it fixes itself. So produce roll is just a tiling texture with some stuff to edit. So we can change the balance. This will change the intensity and the contrast. So let's do something like this. You can mess around with the scale a bit. And then if we hit M, you will go back to your material view. And you can see now that we have some dark parts and some light parts. So let's edit this a bit more till we get something that we like. And I like this. Now we can duplicate the layer, Ctrl D, and let's call this lighten. Now we go back to our filter. We're gonna lighten the color instead. Let's also give it a bit more saturation. And let's go back to a mask. Now we wanna edit this a bit, so let's rotate it a bit. Let's give it a new producer roll. Let's change the intensity a bit. Now you can see that we have some spots that are lightened. So I like this, but I think the effect overall is a bit too strong. So let's go to a folder. Let's call this color variation. Now we can also add a mask here. So I'm gonna add a black mask. This will get rid of the effect. Let's add a fill. Now we have a fill. And now we can edit the intensity of the whole folder. So I like it like this. actually a little bit lower. Let's put the balance here a bit higher. So now we have some nice variation in our color. I also want to get some of the variation back in the roughness. So I'm just gonna hit the roughness channel. For this one as well. Hit the roughness channel, but it's not showing. As like I said earlier, we need to go to our channel, roughness, and put the folder color variation to pass through. Now you can see we have some variation in the roughness as well. So I think that's a nice start for smart material. I also want to emphasize something really important. You always want to be working with filters, not with actual fill layers, as this is a really destructive way to work. Because right now we can change our base color, and you can see that all our filters will update itself, so it won't break. Let's go back. We can even say it's blue and still works. But if we did the darken with a fill layer, where it's just a darkened brown, as soon as we change the base to, let's say, green, now we're gonna have a layer stack that's not working, as it will break, because now you have the green mixed with the brown. And with the hue saturation filter, it will just update based on the base layer. Now let's compare our own material to the other one that we have. As you can see, the wood is supposed to have some details, and we're missing any kind of details right now. So we're gonna make a new group. Start off with a fill layer, just so we can hit Ctrl G to group. We're gonna call this details. Let's take a fill layer. Gonna disable everything except for the height channel. Let's call this layer height. For the details, now we hit add black mask. Gonna add a fill. Add fill. Let's go to produce rules and type wood. Now you can see Substance Painter comes with a wood produce rule. So let's drag it. Alt click to preview the mask. Now we want to rotate the mask. I mean the produce rule. So now you can see that's aligned with the wood. We hit M. Now in the height channel we can choose the intensity of the details. So let's do it a little bit inwards. Now you can see that our wood has some details, but only in the height. Now we can add another filter. So let's go to filters and the HSL again. I don't really like to use any of the others, as I just like to keep it simple. This filter works perfect. So again, for a filter to work, we need to change the blending mode to pass through. Now in the filter, we're gonna drag the lightness down. And as you can see, anything where it's white, now it's darkened in the color. So now you can see that the wood is starting to look a lot better already. So let's mess around a bit with how we want it to look. And yeah, I like this. So let's call this layer color. Then we can do another HSL. And let's call this, let's put it on the roughness channel. Again, roughness, details pass through. Now it will work. Let's drag this. If you drag it down, it will be more shiny. The more black, the more shiny. The more white, the more rough. So let's do it white. If you disable it, you can just see what it does. So now you can see how much more detailed our wood is. It's starting to look a lot better already. So a big problem right now that we're having is that we have these wood planks. As you can see, the details are just continuing. This looks really weird. This breaks any kind of realism. So earlier we gave one of the input maps an ID. If we hit B, you can see the mesh maps. This is our ID map. An ID map is just used to tell Substance Painter, I want to be able to select this part of the mesh and to mask it. And you create this in ZBrush by using polypaint and baking it as the ID map. So let's go to layers and to details. As soon as we have this whole thing done and we're happy with how it looks like, what we have, we can group this again. And as you can see, it breaks again. Put it on pass through, roughness, base color, pass through. Now it's working again. Let's call this one details. Let's call this one 0, 1. Let's do a duplicate. So as you can see, everything's really strong as we're duplicating the effect. Let's hide this one. Now we're gonna edit a mask. Right now we only have the details as a mask. So let's hit M. Let's add color selection. Now we can pick colors. So let's add this one, and we're just gonna go one by one. Now you can see what we're doing. As we have an uneven number, we're gonna have to do this 3 times, but for the sake of this video, I won't. So now we can go to this one. Now let's do the same here, but with the other ones. But we can also, so yeah, it's the ones that are more bright. So let's select the ones that are more bright. Now you can see it's working again. You can see it messed up the colors. So all we have to do is check out the mask. And we can see that's applying it wrong. So let's change the output value to black. Let's do the same for the other one. Black. Now you can see it's working properly again. And the reason why is if we keep this to white, it will apply the effect, the HSL, to everything that's white. So these ones will be fully applied. So just change to black. Now this is a mask, which is good. Now to break this, we can go to our wood. We can just change the offset. Now you can see it's not continuing along anymore. So that's how you can break this kind of stuff up. I also don't like how many knots there are, so let's just lower that. So now we have a pretty nice detailed wood. So now our wood has a layer, as a base layer, a color variation and some details. So we go through it. You can see how with every group we're adding more detail to our material. One thing that's really lacking right now is some wear and tear. So let's make that. We're gonna do another fill layer, Ctrl G to group it. Let's call this edge damage. And there are lots of ways to make the mask for edge damage. But the most easy way is just to go to Smart Masks and type edge damage. And you will see some stuff, but let's keep that edge. So now we can preview, kind of look edge dusty, edge blur. We're just gonna look for one that we like. So I like edge strong scratched. I like how that one looks. So let's drag it to our edge damage group. And you see that it will add some edge damage. The way this works is with the curvature map. Curvature, we linked it earlier in our input maps. It's this one. Let's go to curvature. This is just gonna make all the edges of your model white and you bake this one out. So now Substance Painter can make a map based from that information. If we go here to the curvature, just alt click it to see it, curvature, we get some settings. So here we can go to global balance. We can decide how strong the effect is. So let's keep it kind of subtle. Here at curvature you can change more settings. So let's just mess around with it until we get something that we like. So let's say I like this. Now we have some damage. Now we can change the fill layer to height. Let's get rid of everything except for the height. Let's mess around with that a little bit. And now instead of doing a filter, I am going to use a base layer. The reason why I'm using a base layer instead of a filter is, as you can see, now it's replacing everything in the color that we had before. If we go to filters, we put a filter, the HSL. Let's put this to pass-through. You can see that's keeping the details. That's something I do not like, as this will break the realism, as the details are supposed to disappear when we have some broken edges. Let's change back to normal, get rid of this one. Let's call this base. Now for the color we can just pick here. Let's make it a little bit more light. I think the height is a little bit too strong, so let's turn it down a bit. So I think that's looking pretty nice. But I think it's too subtle, so let's go back to the mask. Global balance, and let's put it up. Now you can see we have some real nice damage. But the problem for me is now that all the damage is very boring and has the same color. So we can go back to a color variation. We can just duplicate this. Duplicate layers. We can put it in the edge damage folder. So let's put this on pass-through again to have it work. Color variation, lighten and darken. Let's go to darken, see the mask. We want to make this a little bit smaller, so it's actually working with this. Let's change the contrast, the balance, and you can now see that we have some breakup here. So we can change the opacity for the strength. Let's do the same for the lighten. Alt click it, let's change the scale, balance, contrast, and hit C to go to color. Now we can just kinda see that's working. Let's make some saturated spots. The whole time you're just messing around with sliders, that's all. Let's change the opacity. As you can see now our edge damage, it has some color variation. This will just help the realism. So I think that's looking pretty nice for our edge damage. Now we can also say we want to have more damage. So let's group the edge damage. Now I see stuff breaks again. We want to set it to pass through. Pass through. And actually I forgot we only did the color, but we still need to do the roughness channel. So let's go back to edge damage. Let's go to base. Let's do the roughness here as well. So for damage, let's just make it really rough. Now here we want to get rid of the roughness. Get rid of the roughness here. I'm gonna do a new HSL. Let's call this one roughness. Disable color and go to roughness only. Now you can see we can edit the roughness as well. So let's edit the roughness a little bit. Let's say a little bit less rough. Let's add a quick mask. Add a fill. Let's go to produce rules. Let's go with B&V spots. So let's view it. Try planar, balance, scale, contrast. Now you can see we just have a little bit more breakup. Let's make the effect a little bit stronger. And all this breakup, all it does is just gonna help the material to be feeling more realistic. So now let's go back to our folder. Let's continue our damage. Let's call damage. Make sure everything's on pass through. Now first damage layer is the edge damage. But we wanna have some damage in overall as well. Let's do a new fill layer. And actually we can just duplicate this whole layer stack. And instead of edge damage, let's call it general damage. Let's view the mask. Let's get rid of it. So now we have no damage in the general damage. Let's add a fill. Produce rules. Let's go to crunches. And now we can just pick a produce rule that we like. So I think this one looks pretty nice. Like there's some scratches and whatever. We can change it however we want. We can also invert it. Invert. So now it's just gonna add some scratches. So let's actually change the name again. Let's go to scratches. And now our scratches will have everything that we did earlier as well. Like we'll have color variation and all that good stuff. So for this, I do want to change the height. I want to make it a little bit more intense, but just a little bit. Now you can see we have a lot of scratch damage. So what we can do is we can go to the mask. We don't just need to use one produce rule. We can also add fill. And we can put the blending mode on multiply. And now we can add another produce rule. And we can pick with this produce rule. We can get rid of some of the parts of this one. So let's go to clouds. As you can see, if we disable this and let's put on normal, anything that's white here, it will show in the old produce rule. So let's go multiply again. It will be a little bit more clear if we up the contrast. You can see that we are getting rid of some of the mask that we had earlier. So we can just do whatever we like, hit the M, to view our material, and you can see how it's now a more subtle effect. And we can change how much it's shown through. So I think like this looks really nice. So we can view our channels. The base color is looking good now. And the roughness as well. Pretty happy with what we have now. So let's do it one more time. Ctrl D, we can also do that to duplicate. And let's call this one general. Let's get rid of the mask again. Let's take a look at some smart masks. Let's type damage, let's see what pops up. Edge damage. I don't like this. So we can just have a look by hand. See if we see something that we like. No, it's not something that I like. So let's go to produce rules and let's build our own mask. So again, fill. It's always good to just look around. Maybe there's a smart mask that's gonna work perfect for you in one time. The other time there isn't, and you're just gonna mess around with produce rolls. So let's go to crunches. Noise maybe? No, crunches. Let's go with this one. Let's change the contrast, the balance. So now we have a really beaten up wood, and I like how it looks. Get rid of some of the bottom. Again, fill. Let's add another mask. Go with dirt for this time. Multiply. And mess around until you got something that you like. So now I'm gonna call our smart material done. Actually, I wanna have a little bit more details in the wood. As you can see, it's lacking some of the more finer detail. If we compare, you can see like these grains. We don't really have that yet. So in the details, let's make a new fill layer. Let's call this height. Ctrl G. Let's name the detail. Fine lines. Let's go with wood lines. You want to make sure that you're as clear as possible in your layer stack. As the more layers you keep adding, the more complicated your project is gonna be. And especially if anyone else is gonna need to work in your substance painter, it can be really difficult to find out later what you're doing. So you just want to try to be as organized as possible. So let's disable everything. Let's add a mask. So let's see if we can find a produce roll that will add some nice lines. So let's look. Can also drag this up. Here we have some lines. It's too much rounded. I wanna have straight lines. So I think these look pretty good. I think the best what we can do is use this one as a base, and then we can use this one as a breakup. So let's start with that one. Add a fill. We're gonna add this one. Actually, let's add the color back so we can see what we're doing. Let's rotate this again. Now you can see we have some straight lines. They're a little bit too thick, so let's change the scale. Now this is messing up, so let's keep that one. We're gonna break this lock. Now we can edit the X separate from the Y. So in the Y we can just scale it up, so we'll have more horizontal lines. So I like this is looking good. One problem is that's looking really straight. What we can also do is we can add filters to masks. So let's add a filter. Let's type warp. This is just gonna warp our mask. As you can see. Let's edit it a bit. Intensity divided 1000 is good. Let's change the intensity. So now we can disable enable, and you can see it's adding some nice breakup. Now height, let's disable the color again. Let's punch this down a bit. Now you can see we have some more lines. Add another filter. Let's call this one color. Let's put the lightness down. Again, pass through. Now you can see we're getting a lot of details in the wood. So I like how that looks. The height. We can also go to the height channel. And you can edit it here. Sometimes it's a little bit more easier as you have more control. Let's also go to the roughness. Let's duplicate this layer. Call it roughness. And then the roughness channel. Let's set on pass through again. Now we get the details back. So as you can see, now we have a lot more detailed wood. Also want to do this one more time. As I said, the other one looks good for breakup. Let's duplicate the whole layer. It's called wood lines breakup. Go to a mask. Now all we do is disable the warp for now. Let's go to produce rules. So let's see the directional noise. Let's check our base color. As you see, it's too general right now. Let's change the contrast. So let's change the scale again a bit. The balance needs to be lower. Put this to 3. Nah, 6. As you can see, now it's just adding some breakup details. Let's do a little bit more balance. And the more breakup you have in your material, the more realistic it's gonna look like. Of course you can have too much breakup and it's gonna become a noise. So you wanna avoid that. So I don't know what happened to the roughness, but it's messing up a bit. So let's go to the roughness. Let's make this more light instead. We have a bit too much height, so it's become really noisy. So for this one, I think we can disable the height. The wood lines breakup. Let's just drag this down. If you have too much height, it's just gonna become noisy. So you wanna keep an eye on that. For this one as well, let's drag it down. This one, drag it down. And for this one. That's a bit better. I think our wood is too rough though now. Yes, that one. Go to the roughness. Let's make the breakup more white instead. So now what we can also do is we can group this. Base color, pass through. Roughness, pass through. Let's call this primary details. Now for the wood lines, these are secondary details. Put it to pass through. Base color, pass through. Let's call this secondary details. So I'm gonna quickly explain what primary details are and secondary details. And you also have the tertiary details and micro details. Those are like the 4 layers that you build up surfaces. You do it in ZBrush as well all the time. So let's actually see if we can spot it here. This one doesn't have micro details, but it has all the others. So the primary details would be these big shapes, right? These are gonna add a lot. And then the secondary details would be like these lines that we were doing earlier. It's basically the more visible the details. It's gonna depend what class they are: primary, secondary, tertiary, micro. So these are still pretty visible, so that is secondary. And then if we zoom in all the way, you see like these lines. They're very visible, but they're gonna break up the surface. Those will be the tertiary details. And then if you add some details that are like almost invisible, that'd be the micro details. In games, we don't really use the micro details, as you won't be seeing them, as it will just become a noise. But you can use them, but don't spend too much time on them. They're more important when you have like really close-up renders, like in films or whatever. And you also just kind of define whatever what is for your own. Like the secondary details doesn't need to be like really small, but if they're the second most visible details on your model, then they become the secondary details. So I do want to add one more detail pass, just to have like some breakup, like some rounded stuff in the wood. So let's add another. Let's do a fill group. Let's call this height. We're gonna leave the color on so we can actually see what we're doing. Let's add a black mask. Let's look for something that's gonna add some rounded details, like some areas I wanna have some more detail. I think a good one would be plasma. So let's add fill. Let's put it here. Now you can see we have some rounded blobs. Change the balance. Change the scale. I think something like that is pretty nice. Let's change the shape up a bit. Let's go to filter, warp. Now we can warp it a bit. Now we want to get rid of some of these. So let's go to fill. Let's actually do another plasma. Change the balance. Or maybe a Berlin noise. Change the balance. Now we have some spots. Now we can mess around with the blending mode. So now only on the white the details are gonna show through. Let's make this one a little bit bigger. Now we have some spots. I think we need a little bit more contrast. So we can do a levels. Let's see a mask. You just want to mess around with it. So now we have some spots. I want them to be a little bit more spread. So we can add a filter. We can do a blur, but not the normal blur. You have a blur slope. This is just gonna break the shape up in a more organic way. So I think that's good. Let's go to height. Let's disable everything except for the height. Let's punch this in. So now you can see our wood has some punched in height. Filter, HSL. Let's change the lightness. Pass through. This is just gonna add a little more breakup. As you can see, it doesn't add a whole lot. It's just gonna add some breakup from the material, so it looks less repeating. So let's call this one spots. Let's move it in a secondary details folder. That's it for our wood material. I think we have something that looks good now. So now that we're done with our wood material, let's compare. So as you can see, the wood looks good. The advantage of making your own smart materials is they can make it look like how you want it to look. If we use this material, I don't like how this wood looks. I prefer something that looks more grime and dark. Now we're gonna have to go in the layer stack and edit everything. And at that point you're just kind of working against yourself. For me it's easier to just start off fresh and do whatever you want. Now I know exactly how my smart material works. And I can easily edit anything I want later on. So one very important step is just right click. Now you can click create smart material. Actually let's change the name. Put, let's say try for Trigon. So now we can right click, create smart material. Now in our smart materials tab, we will get a new smart material called a wood trig material. Now when you're working on any kind of project where you're using wood, let's say I made this for this wooden barrel, but I also have a wooden crate. I can just drag the smart material. It's gonna load. Now we have a smart material. So now it's the same as using the painted default smart materials, except for that we made this one ourselves. So let's get rid of the default one. Let's talk about something else that's pretty important. How your Substance Painter looks. It's like a small thing, but it's just gonna make working in Substance Painter more nicely. I always want to work with the Tomoko Studio. This one just has a little bit more accurate color. Like the base color will be more similar to your material color. I like to put the opacity all the way up and the blur also all the way up. Now with the opacity it becomes like a slide of how dark your background should be. So let's say like this. So I want to add some shadows. Let's put on average. If you have a really good computer you can put it on intensive, but average is fine. You can change the opacity. I like to put it somewhere down the middle. The focal length, I like to work with a really big one. Let's put it at 80. And the bigger the focal length, the less perspective you have. And the smaller, the more perspective you have. If you're working with faces in portrait photography, like 80 is the usual that people go with. You can post effects, let's add some vignette. Anti-aliasing, I like to just put it all the way on top. And sometimes I like to work with color profiles. But one thing that's like important, you need to remember that it's gonna distort like your color accuracy. Like what you see is not the actual texture at this point. So you can just pick one that you like and you can kinda mess around with it. I don't like to work with this too much. Usually I just turn it on at the end to get a little bit nicer of a look. But I'll come back and turn it off a lot of times to see more accurately what my textures are looking like. Texture filtering, we can put this one a little bit higher. It's just gonna give us a little bit nicer of a preview. You can change the AO intensity. You can change the quality. Let's put that high. And all these other settings I don't really mess around with. So let's go back and change the opacity. Let's put a little bit more like this. And to me the viewport looks a lot nicer to look at now. Now of course we're working with multiple materials. Not everything's gonna be wood. Like here we have metal parts. So let's go to smart materials. And now you can choose to make another smart material and do it all from scratch. But as it's just to show you a video, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna go with a basic one. Let's type steel. Let's go with steel ruined. So let's drag it. Now we're gonna have to mask out the metal parts. Let's add a black mask. And what you can do is you can add mask with color selection. Now with the ID map we can choose the parts that's gonna have the metal selected. But as these are separate meshes, I prefer to just go here. But if everything is merged together, you're gonna need to use your ID map. We can put it to object. And whatever object we click will have white applied. Or you can have black applied. So let's go through it. And now I'm gonna have to select all of these little things. So a better way to do it is just to select everything here, make it black. Now we make white the part that we don't wanna be shown. And now all that we have to do is add a filter. Let's go to invert. This is gonna invert the black to white and the white to black. Now you can see we have it. Let's also add some rust to this. Actually, let's make it a little bit less shiny first. On top of smart materials, the easiest way to edit them is just to go to filters again, the HSL all the way at the top. Let's say it's too shiny, roughness, and we can change it all really fast and easy. And I think that looks a lot better right now. So let's call that one roughness minus. There's a pretty cool filter here as well, somewhere. Filters. You have this rust filter. You can drag this on top. It's just gonna add some rust. So pick something that you like. And I think that looks pretty cool. It's a bit too much though. So let's say this is fine. Now we have a steel ruined, let's call it metal. And we have a wood. I like to right click and give it colors. This way you can just easily see in the layer stack what's about. Like if you have a lot open, I can easily say this is red, here's green, here's a new material. Now we're pretty far on the textures. One thing that I like to do is add a fill layer, Ctrl G to group it, and put a layer on top called FX. And this is just gonna be effects. So let's call this one curve for the curvature. So disable everything except for the color and roughness. Let's go to project, clear project. Now we're gonna grab a curvature map. Let's put in both slots. This is just gonna fill that channel with the texture. Let's set this on pass through. Roughness, pass through. Let's go to the roughness. Now the blending mode, we're gonna put this to overlay. Now it's gonna overlay a roughness. Overlay a curvature on the roughness. This is just gonna give your model a little bit more depth and it's gonna get some of the details from your high poly back in the textures. You wanna keep this subtle though, let's put that 25. And for the base color, gonna do the same. Overlay. 25. It's just gonna add some depth. And it's a really subtle effect, but it helps. It is gonna darken everything though. So we can also add another filter. And I like to use the color correct filter here. Let's keep the name, it's good, it's color correct. Now we can just correct the color. So let's go to our color channel. We can mess around with these sliders just to get a better look. So change it however you want to. I think that's pretty nice. We can drag a PBR validator on top. And we can check if we're breaking PBR values. Wherever it's red, it's not good. Where it's green, it's good. So you can see that we broke a little bit. Just drag this one down a bit. You can break it, but just be aware of it that you're breaking PBR. But in the end, I like to just do whatever looks better. But I do want to stick to the edge. I don't want to push the PBR values too much in the broken side. So I think that looks pretty nice. I do want to change your edge damage a bit though. So we can go in our layer stack. We can look to damage, general, scratch edge damage. Now instead of changing the base, we can do that, but we can also just drag a HSL on top. And we can edit it this way. The thing with using these filters on top instead of going back in your base is gonna make your material take longer to generate in Paint. So that's something that you need to be aware of. But it's just faster and easier and you have some more control on top. It's just gonna be more organized. So I do like to use it. So let's call it color adjustment. Let's put the saturation up a bit. Lightness. Put that down a little bit. Too much. I can see it's a little bit more saturated. And I like it a little bit more like this. You can also add a fill. Add a black mask. Fill. Project. get our ambient occlusion. Actually, filters. We don't want to do a fill. HSL. Black mask. Fill. Project. Ambient occlusion. Now we have a mask with our AO and we can bake the AO into our texture. We do need to invert this though. Add filter, invert. Now you can see we're baking the AO into a color map. Again, this is gonna break some of the PBR workflow. It's just gonna make your textures look nice, in my opinion. When I'm doing renders in Marmoset, I like to do this, but if I'm doing something in Unreal Engine, I don't like to do the AO bake into the textures, as we can make a custom shader and we can control the AO intensity bake down in the color in the shader itself there. But for now I'm just gonna keep it here. And the roughness, I don't like to edit it. So now we're pretty much done with our materials. We got our materials defined. The only thing that we're missing right now is some wear, some weathering. This is just gonna blend materials together and make your textures come alive. Right now we don't have any impact from our environment. This sounds a little bit fake, but you'll see in a bit. It's really easy. So let's go all the way to top. Let's change. Let's put the FX at top. I'd like to have that one at the top all the time. Let's give the color. Let's call this weathering. Ctrl G, and here we're gonna do our first weathering layer. So let's call this one dust. Now on a fill layer, you can choose the dust color and whatever. I like to use like a dark bluish, because this is really brown and a complementary color of the brown is blue. So that's why I like to use the blue here. Let's go to a smart mask. Let's type dust. Remember, we can use a smart mask or we can create our own using fill and produce roles and maps. Let's look for one. The soft dust, edges. The subtle. Let's try this one. Let's put the balance up. Now you can see we're getting dust. This is just gonna blend it in a little bit better, the materials. So I think that looks nice. It's a little bit too dark though. Make it a little bit more light. Put saturation down a bit. Yeah, I like that. Let's also do another one. Let's say blood. Let's just make some settings that look nice for like a blood. I like to use blood because it's like I'm thinking of battle scene, the Vikings walking around for example, and there ended up being some blood on a barrel. This is how you can tell story through your textures, and they're gonna make your objects come to life a bit more. For this one, let's go to produce roles, fill. And let's see if we can find like a nice one. Maybe like a fluid. Nah, that looks horrible. Just go through your crunches and see if you can find something that you like. Black mask. fill. But I want to keep this really subtle. You don't want to have too much, that's gonna look weird. Let's change the color. Because this is going on both materials, it's just gonna blend the materials together a bit better. One thing that I wanna do is though, UV protection, triplanar. As you can see now it's going a little bit better. Like you have a splatter of blood that continues on the next thing. So let's do a little bit less. And for this barrel, I'm imagining it standing on the ground. So let's add another fill layer. Let's go to Smart Mask. And we have dirt ground. Let's edit this a bit. Put the AO down all the way. Let's do the curvature down as well. Let's do the balance, the level up. Now you can see we have dirt that starts from the bottom. Do the crunch down. Let's do a fill. We can go to producibles, let's do a simple clouds. And put this on multiply. This is just gonna break our mask up a bit. Do a level up a bit again. This be in its own folder. Control G. Actually, let's make this like mud. It's gonna add some nice breakup in the roughness. This adds a lot of height here. It's not working well. Hold on. Let's copy this mask. If you put it on the wrong layer, you can just copy mask. Make a black mask. Add it in fill. I mean paste into mask. Now we have a mask back. We can get rid of this mask. Let's see why it's not working. We still have the mask here, remove mask. And I cannot find why it's not working. So let's just do it again. Let's delete the whole layer. Let's copy the mask though. Copy mask. I'm gonna group it. Add a black mask. So fill and paste into mask. As you can see, it's still not working. That means the mask is broken. So let's add a black mask. If you shift click, you can disable it. Let's go to Smart Mask and let's just drag it in again. So ground. As you can see, now it's working. And I'm not sure, maybe it was just a bug. Let's change the global balance. Like, yeah, let's put it up all the way. I think that looks nice. Let's call this one base. Put the roughness down, it's way too much. So I think that's nice. The problem right now is we don't have any variation in the mud. So what we can do is we can create our variation layers again. We can just go in here. We can be really lazy. Just copy layers. Now Ctrl D, duplicate them. And we can just drag them from one smart material into another layer stack. As you can see, now we have some variation back again. I think that's way too much variation though, so let's push that down. I think that's nice. So let's call this mud. Let's add a fill. Let's go with clouds again. Put it on multiply. I'm not sure why this is breaking it. So if it's not working, we can also just group this again. Put on pass through. And on the second group, now we can add another mask. Let's do a black mask, add fill. Now we can drag the producer all here. As you can see, now it's working. Let's change the offset a little bit. Now we have some mud on our barrel. I think it's still a little bit too much though. We can mess around with this mask. Or we can go down to this mask. We can change the balance. You can basically add whatever you can think of. Like let's say it has some grass spots on it, you can add some green spots or whatever. And yeah, that's basically all there is to texturing. It's just you're working with layers and you keep building your stuff up. So let's do a quick run through. As you can see, first we have a base, it's just one solid color. Now we add color variation and roughness variation. It still doesn't look like anything. We add our details, now it's starting to look like something. Then we add a damage, it's gonna add a lot of nice breakup. Now it's starting to look like something. Gonna add more materials. Then we add some wear and some weathering. It's gonna tell some story and break our textures up more. And then the effects layer. And that's it, that's all there is to texturing. Like I said earlier, we don't have the right colors though, we have the color profile. So you do want to see how it looks without. And actually there's one more thing to texturing that I forgot to talk about. Right now we only worked with generators and produce roles, doing everything with that. But we didn't do anything by hand. Like to push your textures further, you do want to do some hand painting. So let's say in the wood, we can go here. We can create a new layer. Make the group and let's say hand painted edge damage. Make it black. Now we can go to brushes, clear the search. Let's use a basic soft brush. Let's add a paint. Go to brush. Now we can start to paint some damage. This is just gonna push your textures to the next level. It's gonna look a lot more natural. It's gonna have more breakup. So now there we have some damage here. It's also nice you can like follow your textures. Like the generators that we added, they can guide you. Here we have like this shape. We can say, alright, let's take this shape. Let's just get rid of it. And by following what you did earlier, it's gonna make your textures look more natural. So of course this looks horrible. So now we need to actually change the attributes. The color. Again, I'm not using a fill layer. I'm using a fill layer because I want to get rid of the details underneath it. So in color, let's color select it. Let's go with this one. Hide roughness. We do need to hide. roughness, we're gonna put this one really rough. Now on the height, we're gonna push this one down. That's looking pretty good. And we can still also edit our hand painted stuff with filters and fills. For this one, I like to add a filter, blur, and slope. Change the divider and intensity. And this is gonna give a little bit more of an organic look to what we did. Now we can just go back to the paint. We can start painting away stuff that we don't want. So again, I'm just following the producer rules that we put in earlier. And it's a little bit slow. If you want to have it faster, you can go to texture settings. You can change the size to 2K. It's just gonna go through all your layers and it's gonna generate them in 2K. As you can see, it looks a lot worse, but now we can paint a lot faster. So my computer's pretty okay, so I can keep it at 4K. It's just gonna generate everything again, but at 4K. So let's continue to paint here. I think that looks nice. Can actually add a little bit more detail. Just make it a little bit less big. As you can see, now our material has a lot more nice breakup. You can just turn it off and on. You can see it adds a lot. So you want to do this for everything here. We can also go to weathering. Let's make a new folder. Like I said earlier, we can add some grass spots. Let's call this grass spots. Let's make it green. Less saturated. Right, black mask. Add paint. And now at the brushes, we can pick one that we like. I like to use this one a lot, the dirt one. Now we can just paint some spots on there. It's a bit too strong. And you need to remember that whatever we paint, we can edit it with produce rules. So you can add a fill. Put this to multiply. Produce rules. Let's add a spots. Now we can change this. Now we can just edit your hand painted stuff a bit more. What you can also do is you can go to the blood one that we did. We can add a paint. Now we can hand paint some blood away. So let's say we paint that away. But one problem doing it this way, now if we want to paint that back, we take the white and you can see it ignores the generated. So let's undo that. We're gonna add the blood. We're gonna add a mask here on the folder on top. So let's add a white mask. Now if we get rid of this, we can go back to the white and we can still paint it back, but only where the generator generated it. So it's a little bit less destructive. And yeah, That's really all there is to texturing. So now that we textured an asset, all we have to do is Ctrl E. We can pick our settings and we can export it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I explained everything there is in Substance Painter to texturing, to what I use. There's a lot more techniques and different stuff that we didn't touch on, but those are all things that I do not use, like you don't need them. These are the basics, and with this you can texture anything you want. And once you get comfortable doing this workflow, you can start to expand it and look a bit more on other stuff that there is. And these aren't the final textures that I did for this model. Over here you can see the final textures that I did for this model. But it's all using the same techniques. In maybe 1 or 2 days I'm gonna upload a full video of doing these textures. But I'm not gonna go into explaining what I do in the video, as I already did in this video. It will just be a 2-hour long video of texturing. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and if you want to see this video, the next one, make sure to subscribe. Bye guys.